For 3 long days, an old woman sat on a concrete slab at the bustling Iana bus stop. The constant churn of people, buses, and market vendors seemed to move around her, not with hostility, but with the cold indifference of a world too busy to notice. She was a ghost in broad daylight, her faded wrapper caked with dust and the remnants of a recent downpour. Her head was bowed, and her hands were folded neatly in her lap, a silent act of defiance against the chaos that enveloped her. She wasn't begging, she wasn't speaking, she simply existed, a forgotten relic in a space where everyone was in a hurry. Her presence quickly became the subject of wild theories. A schoolgirl, peering at her from the safety of her mother's side, whispered, "Who is she?" only to be pulled away with a stern, "Keep walking." The woman who sold boiled corn had her own dramatic take. "I heard her children abandoned her. They said she refused to die, so they left her for the road," she gossiped to a customer, pointing with a callous thumb. An Okada rider offered a darker twist, claiming the woman was a powerful elder who had escaped from a rich family that was keeping her a prisoner. But despite the whispers and the cruel theories, no one came close enough to ask her if she was in trouble. The bus stop was a place of transit, not compassion. People passed her by, some with a quick glance of pity, others with a shiver of discomfort. They accepted her presence as an unpleasant part of the scenery, a problem that belonged to someone else. The bus conductors, the street hawkers, the mothers with their children, each person saw her, but no one truly noticed her. She was a piece of forgotten history, parked on the edge of the world. Among the crowd, only one person saw her as more than a forgotten object. His name was Jide, a 16-year-old groundnut seller. He was tall, sharp, and had a quiet wit that made him stand out. He moved with a plastic container under his arm and a tray on his head, his voice a familiar chant of sweet groundnut. He had noticed the old woman on the first day and had even offered her water, which she had accepted with a blank but gentle nod. He told his mother about her, and she reacted with a mother's fierce caution. "Jide, do you want to run mad? You saw somebody looking lost, tattered, and dirty, and your spirit told you to hold a conversation." Jide simply replied, "She looks like someone that used to matter." Jide couldn't shake the image of the old woman from his mind. Her dignity, even in the midst of her decay, had left a deep impression on him. Against his mother's frantic warnings, he went back to the bus stop. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the slab where she still sat, motionless. He approached her carefully, his voice soft. "Good evening, Ma." She looked up, her eyes still clouded, but her lips managing a faint smile. "Evening, my son." The brief conversation they had a few days prior had faded from her mind, but he reminded her that she had told him her name was Eleanor. He looked around, a new determination forming in his mind. Across the road, an old onion seller named Uncle Sewell was preparing to close his shop, his rusty wheelbarrow resting against a lamppost. Jide walked over and with his most charming grin asked, "Uncle Sewell, I beg, borrow me this wheelbarrow for 20 minutes. Uncle Sewell blinked, his gaze shifting to the old woman across the street. "That woman? Oh, take. Just return it in one piece." He didn't understand, but the desperate urgency in Jide's eyes was enough. Jide hushed the wheelbarrow across the street and stopped it with a flourish in front of Eleanor. He straightened his back proudly, clearing his throat like a professional chauffeur. "Your ride is here, Ma," he announced. "My limousine premium model, smooth steering. No seatbelt, but I promise not to hit any gutter." Eleanor stared at the rusty metal for a long moment, a confused expression on her face. Then her eyes began to twinkle. She looked from the wheelbarrow to Jide and back again, and an unexpected sound filled the quiet evening air. She burst into laughter, the kind of pure, unrestrained laughter that had been locked away for years. She slapped her thighs softly, and her face, once so empty, was now alive with a long-forgotten joy. "Okay, young man," she chuckled, "let's go. Let's find the Black Gate." As G-Day carefully helped her into the wheelbarrow, folding her tattered wrapper away from the rusty edges, a true bond was forged. He had treated her not like a burden, but like royalty, and in doing so, he had restored a flicker of her spirit. G-Day began pushing her down the street, their conversation a mix of his playful banter and her genuine amusement. He described the perfect temperature of the open air and promised her any type of music she wanted, from Fuji to traditional drums. She called him mad, with a soft, affectionate smile, a far cry from the blank-faced woman she had been just minutes earlier. The journey continued for what felt like an eternity, through one street after another, until they finally turned onto a wide, tree-lined street that was eerily quiet. The houses were sprawling, set back from the road behind manicured lawns and high walls. Eleanor gasped and told him to stop. "This one. This street. I know it." They rolled to the end of the street, where a massive black gate with gold lion heads stood like a palace wall. The opulence was blinding, and G-Day's jaw dropped. "This is it. That's my house," she said, her voice completely normal, devoid of any confusion. He couldn't believe it. "Your house? Ma? Are you Dangoat's auntie?" She simply ignored his question and told him to knock. When the security man finally opened the gate, he peered out with a look of suspicion. "Who you want carry?" he grunted. "I brought Madam," G-Day replied, gesturing to the wheelbarrow. The man looked out and froze. "Madam," he screamed, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The compound exploded in chaos. Maids, drivers, and relatives rushed out, their dramatic cries of relief sounding more like a rehearsed performance. A young woman in a silk robe screamed, "Mama, you're alive. I told them you'd come back." G-Day wheeled Eleanor past the marble pillars and the lion statues at the door. He was a silent observer in this absurd, dramatic scene. When they reached the center of the living room, which was decorated like a high-end hotel lobby, he gently helped her out of the wheelbarrow. She looked at him with warm, clear eyes, a stark contrast to the distant gaze she had at the bus stop. "What's your name?" she asked again. "G-Day." She nodded. "You pushed me like a king would push his queen. Thank you." As he wheeled the barrow out into the street, one of the cooks whispered, "Some people push wheelbarrows and find destiny." Before her sudden disappearance, Eleanor was a force of nature. She was the co-founder of S&M Conglomerate, a multi-billion naira telecommunications company she had built from scratch with her late husband, Chief Ayadeji. He was her rock, her confidant, and the only person who truly knew her. She didn't just run businesses, she built legacies. Her name opened doors and her voice sealed deals. Outside of the boardroom, she was a generous philanthropist who funded hospitals, sponsored children, and gave like royalty. But for all her wealth and power, the one thing she never had was a child. After years of trying, she and her husband finally accepted that her womb would never bear a baby. Her happy home was shattered 5 years ago when Chief Ayadeji collapsed and died from a sudden heart attack. His death was a signal for his relatives to begin circling like vultures. His cousins, nieces, and nephews started visiting, their faces a mask of feigned concern, but their eyes were always counting the days. They were not waiting for her to heal. They were waiting for her to die so they could split her empire down the middle. Even most of the house staff were spies planted by these same relatives, and Eleanor couldn't sneeze without it being reported to them. The final blow came with a doctor's diagnosis: early-stage dementia. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, with every corner whispering with calculation, and every plate clinking with an ulterior motive. She knew they were just waiting for her to die. So, one early morning, she decided that if they were waiting for her to die, she would do the one thing they didn't expect. She would leave. She didn't pack anything, she just walked. She strolled down her street and kept going, watching as the houses blurred and the street signs became strangers. She ended up at the Iona bus stop, not because her memory failed, but because her legs did. This was all part of her plan, a cruel test to see who would show genuine compassion without an agenda. The next morning at 6:45 a.m., Jide arrived at the mansion gate. He was nervous, dressed in his sharpest shirt and black trousers, which he had carefully ironed with the back of a spoon. The same security man from yesterday greeted him with suspicion and pride. Jide was then met by a short, bold-wigged woman named Tola, who introduced herself as Eleanor's personal secretary. She spoke condescendingly, laughing off Jide's claim that Eleanor was expecting him, saying she says many things. She once said she saw my dead uncle playing piano in the guest room. She finally let him in, but not without a stern warning not to touch anything, as it was more expensive than your entire street. Inside the compound, everything was even more intimidating. The flowers were brighter, the glass windows sparkled, and an expensive car sat under a gold-plated carport. Jide was led to the back patio, where Eleanor was sitting in a rocking chair, sipping tea like a duchess. She was no longer in the dusty wrapper. She was now dressed in a clean lace gown with soft white slippers. She looked like somebody, the kind of somebody people wrote about in newspapers. She smiled warmly at him and told him he was already hired as her personal assistant. Jide was stunned. He had never been anyone's assistant before, but Eleanor simply said, "Neither have I. We'll figure it out together." Her offer of a 50,000 naira monthly salary was more money than he had ever seen. He nearly fell off his chair, but she simply laughed and said it was a small amount compared to what he would be handling soon. When he got home that evening, his mother was in a panic, but she quickly calmed down when he mentioned the money. She then wanted to know every detail, from the color of the tea to the fabric of Eleanor's clothes. As Jide settled into his role, he was a silent observer. He watched as some of the staff warmed up to him, while others, particularly the maids and relatives, eyed him with disdain. He learned to manage Eleanor's schedule, remind her to take her pills, and organize her home office. One quiet Thursday, a woman named Tola walked into the office, smelling of money and imported vanilla. She introduced herself as Eleanor's secretary from a mainland office and began her insidious proposition. Tola, with a smile that was sharp and sweet at the same time, leaned in and told him that Eleanor often forgot things and left important documents lying around. She hinted that if he were to come across these files, a generous reward would be waiting for him. "Let's not act naive, Jide," she said sweetly. "A file here, a signature there, and your future is set." Jide, however, was not tempted. He smiled gently and replied, "Okay, I'll think about it." What he didn't know was that Tola's entire encounter was a carefully staged test, and Eleanor was watching him every step of the way. For the next few days, Jide found what he believed were carelessness-induced slips from Eleanor. Money on a hallway table and documents with real estate titles left open on a desk. He simply returned the money to her room and closed the file, putting it back in its drawer. He didn't think anything of it, but Eleanor was silently taking note of everything. Her eyes were sharp, and she watched his every move from the shadows. She knew that in a house full of spies and manipulators, Jide was an honest man, a rare find. 3 days later, Eleanor called him into the study. "Jide," she said, "what did you want to become in life before a wheelbarrow entered your story?" He hesitated. then spoke of his dream to be a lawyer, of his love for justice and truth, and the pain of knowing his parents could never afford the school fees. Eleanor didn't speak. She just listened, her expression unreadable. After he left, she made a series of quick phone calls. The next week, a man in glasses arrived at the gate, holding a stack of law textbooks. G-Day was in the backyard when a man, Mr. Chinidu, introduced himself as his private tutor. He was to prepare G-Day for university beginning that very day. G-Day was stunned. He walked inside to find Eleanor casually reading the newspaper. He told her about the tutor, and she simply replied, "Yes, he's your lesson teacher. He'll come 3 times a week." Tears filled G-Day's eyes. "Why me, Ma?" he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Eleanor slowly folded her paper and looked him square in the eye. Her voice was clear and firm, with no trace of the dementia he had been told she had. "I've been watching you, G-Day. I have been testing you over and over. You didn't know, but I saw everything. You carried me with love in your wheelbarrow limousine. You made me feel like I mattered again. You treated me better than the people who claimed they loved me." She reached for his hand. "You have been a son to me, G-Day, and I want you to become the man you are meant to be." Just 3 days after G-Day started his private lessons, trouble came knocking. The main gate didn't open gently. It flew open with a bang, as if a battle was about to begin. G-Day, who was in the kitchen, heard a housemaid whisper, "Uncle is here," and he immediately retreated to the backyard. Inside, a storm was brewing. Eleanor's greedy nephew, Prince Will, stormed into her study, his face contorted with entitlement and rage. He had no regard for the sanctity of the room that used to be a fortress. "So, this is what you've turned your life into," he barked. "Following small boys up and down the house? A boy toy assistant." Eleanor didn't flinch. She sat calmly behind her desk, flipping through her planner as if he were a minor annoyance. He continued his tirade, his voice raising in a theatrical display of self-righteous fury. "You brought in a stranger from the street, a groundnut seller, to be your personal assistant. Are you not ashamed? I want him gone by the end of today." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her calm a deadly weapon. "This is my house, not your brother's, not your grandfather's," she said, her voice low and sharp. He laughed, a bitter sound of disbelief. "You think we don't know your plan? You're old and sick. It's time to let the real family handle things." She smiled, but it was a cold, cutting expression. "I've been living with snakes, staff who spy on me, maids who report me, family who counts my breaths, waiting for me to collapse. And you are the head of the feeding committee?" He snapped. "This nonsense must end." Eleanor stood up slowly, her voice laced with a finality that made him shudder. "You hated Iadeji. You envied him. And now you want to inherit what you never helped him build." She looked him in the eye, her gaze a testament to years of resilience. "You've been regretting your own life since 1984. Don't add me to your headache." She then sat back down, took a sip of her tea, and muttered, "Ungrateful lizard," as he stormed out in defeat. 2 days later, Eleanor called a family meeting. The relatives, sensing that this was their moment, arrived with a greedy, almost celebratory air. Auntie Bridget arrived in full lace, ready for a party, and Uncle Cola wore a suit that looked like he'd borrowed it from a mannequin. They gathered in the living room, their eyes darting around, greedily taking in the marble floors and the crystal chandelier. They all looked at each other, wondering which one of them would be the chosen one to inherit her fortune. The lawyer arrived, his face solemn, and the room fell silent. He cleared his throat and announced, "Madam Eleanor has called this meeting to formally declare her successor, the person who will take over her personal estate, business interests, and all legal holdings." A collective gasp filled the room. The relatives shifted in their seats, their faces a mix of anticipation and feigned humility. The lawyer continued, "And that person is Jide." The silence lasted for 1 full second, then the room exploded. "Who?" "That boy. You gave everything to a groundnut seller?" A cacophony of shouts, insults, and tears filled the air. Auntie Bridget screamed, "You're wicked. This is jazz," while Uncle Femi burst into a theatrical wail. Jide just stood there, frozen, his eyes wide with shock, his heart racing. He was the center of a storm he couldn't comprehend. Eleanor simply raised her hand. "I said, get out." The security guards moved in. As they were escorted out, the relatives continued to curse and threaten her. When the dust settled, Jide slumped into a chair beside her, tears streaming down his face. "Why me?" he sobbed. "I'm not even part of this family." Eleanor looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "You have treated me better than any family ever did," she said softly. "You carried me with love in your wheelbarrow limousine. You made me feel human again." Eleanor took his hand gently. "I tested you, Jide. I planted a fake secretary. I left money lying around. I set traps. You passed all of them, not knowing I was watching. You reminded me that love is not blood, it's behavior. And you, Jide, have behaved like a son when all I had were hyenas and lace." He buried his face in her lap. "I don't know what to say," he mumbled. "Then say thank you," she whispered. "And don't ever doubt what you deserve again." A few months after the successor saga, Jide gained admission to a university. He had no idea Eleanor had submitted his forms for him. He came home from a private lesson one afternoon to find her sitting on the patio, a university acceptance letter in her lap, sipping Zobo, as if she were just waiting for a parcel. "Ma, this is real?" he asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at him casually. "Why are you shouting? You're going to school. You said law, right? I hope you know how to argue very well." The matriculation day was something else. Eleanor came dressed in lace, so pristine you had to squint to see it. Jide's mother, who had been skeptical at first, wore her best attire like it was battle armor, and his siblings behaved as if they were attending a wedding. Eleanor held Jide's hand the entire time, telling everyone who cared to listen, "This is my son, the one I told you about. A brilliant boy, the first in the family." When the provost asked if she was his biological mother, she smiled and said, "We passed that level. We're on a spiritual contract and a divine partnership now." As the months passed, a new family dynamic emerged. Eleanor became close to Jide's family, his mother visiting with bowls of soup, and his siblings calling her grandma. The bonds were not of blood, but of mutual respect and genuine affection. Jide was a son to her, and they were a family to him. But as the joy grew, so did the silence. Eleanor's memory, which had been so clear at first, began to slip again, this time for real. The true dementia began subtly. One morning, she poured salt into her tea and asked Jide, "Are you not going to school anymore because of this exam?" He gently reminded her that he was still in school. "Oh," she said, sipping the salty tea. "I thought I had a lawyer's son. Maybe I dreamed it." From that day on, Jide's life became a devoted ritual of care. He adjusted his holidays and came home often, staying by her side, reminding her to eat and reading her stories, even if she couldn't follow the plot. Every evening he would whisper, "I'm still your son. I'm here." The day he finally graduated, he didn't go straight home. He first passed by the tailor's shop and ironed his graduation gown with a reverence that felt holy. He walked into her room, where she was staring at the ceiling, humming an old hymn from the 1960s. He knelt beside her bed. "Mama," he whispered, "I'm your son." She turned slowly and looked at his face, then at the gown in his hand. He gently placed the graduation cap on her head and draped the gown around her frail shoulders. Your son is now a lawyer, Mama. Eleanor touched the fabric with weak, trembling fingers. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it was not from recognition. It was from a deep, peaceful fulfillment. Adeji, she whispered, our son is a lawyer. I told you. I told you we would be parents one day. I'm not barren. I'm not a failure. I'm not forgotten. She smiled, and it was a genuine, peaceful, and wholehearted smile, the same smile he had seen when she first laughed in his wheelbarrow. Eleanor lived until she was 95. Her memory never returned. She forgot where the spoons were kept and what day it was, but every morning, Jide would visit. Are you my therapist? She'd ask. He would laugh and say, No, Mama, I'm your beloved son. And she would reply, Oh, I have a son. Every day, Jide would give her updates on his life. Mama, your son just won a big contract today. Mama, your son donated books to a school today. Mama, your son was featured in the papers. And she would simply smile, because some truths don't need memory. They live in the heart. Thanks for watching. Please write your thoughts on the story on the comment sections. Like and share with your family and friends. Encourage them to subscribe. Blessings.
Hello, friends. It's your personal person, Cha. Thank you for watching and for being a part of this family. Please like and subscribe for more wisdom tales. See you in the next video.